everybody, welcome to this week's video, ways to integrate patient and service user experiences into nurse education. And I've been a registered nurse educator for over 27 years, so I'm going to share different strategies that I've used. Hopefully some of you will find it helpful. They're relevant to any field of nursing, and we're being asked nationally to integrate service user, patient feedback, experiences and perspectives into our nursing programmes. I'll also discuss the positive impact that has on learners' experiences, and I'd love other nurse educators to share their ideas and experiences too in the YouTube comments. Remember, if you find this video helpful, then give me a thumbs up on YouTube, and I hope you find the session helpful today. So the first way to integrate patient or service user perspectives and experiences into your programs is to invite them to speak directly to your learners. And when I was a lead for undergraduate modules and post-registration nursing modules, I would always invite patient volunteers in to speak about their experiences. One lady in particular had been a hospital inpatient for months with a tracheostomy, and she had a neurological autoimmune disorder, and that weakened her respiratory muscles, and she wasn't able to, and arms and legs, and she wasn't able to move. And she remembered nurses coming in and suctioning down her tracheostomy tube and how frightening that felt. And some nurses were much more gentle than others at suctioning. And she remembered one nurse saying, "I'm not sure how to do this suctioning," whilst she was moving towards her with this suction tube. And she went on to share these feelings and experiences with newly registered nurses on our preceptorship programme. And how that impacted was it really increased their learners' awareness of how it felt to have a tracheostomy. When you're unable to move your arms, you're powerless, you're unable to move, you're unable to speak. And once the preceptorship programme was completed, the newly registered nurses filled out their evaluations, and a year later one of them stated, "Having the lady speak to us about when she was a patient last year with a tracheostomy was the best feature of the preceptorship programme. She told us how hard it was to have it stuck in her throat. It really stayed with me, and I'm so gentle around my patient's neck when I wash a tracheostomy now." And this extract was taken from the reference Forde-Johnston 2017, the reference is at the end, and it was from a paper that was evaluating our preceptorship programme, because I later got it published. And another learner wrote, newly registered nurse wrote, "It made me realise how vulnerable patients can feel when they're ill, and we should never stop caring for the person." So I think these examples really show the impact and benefits of patient and service users sharing their experiences with learners. They provoke this emotional response. So hearing other people's stories is really powerful, and it can influence future behaviours. And as with these nurses, you could see how it influenced how one cared for a person with a tracheostomy, and she used an empathetic approach, putting herself in the person's shoes and being gentle when she was cleaning around the tracheostomy site. So a few tips relating to patient and service users talking directly to learners for nurse educators. It's helpful to link to relevant specialist charities who have often got a list of volunteers. So when I ran the neuroscience post-registration courses, I linked to neuroscience-based charities. So we've got Headway, the Brain Injury Association, Parkinson's UK, Motor Neurone Disease Association, or the Stroke Association. So whichever specialist field you work in, there's going to be a whole remit of charities around that specialism. And they were really supportive, and I would ring them up, and a volunteer would come out and speak to our students or registered nurses, and sometimes the partners or carers would come out and speak too about their experiences. Another tip is to discuss content beforehand with the service user or patient or carer that's talking, to be really clear on what they want to cover, because remember, they probably don't have teaching experience, but don't presume they don't. I remember volunteers that had been primary school teachers or university lecturers, so don't presume that. They could have a teaching background. So be clear on what you want covered, the timings beforehand. It's helpful to be flexible, because sometimes when someone's talking about their story, their life, it can be, quite rude and quite hard really to cut them short, and if they're passionately telling their story. So I always used to have a break I used to schedule the person talking and then have a break so that if they went over it, it wouldn't have caused a problem with the schedule. And I'd allow sort of 15 minutes to 30 minutes for questions on your schedule as well. And it gave students time to reflect, and it meant I didn't have to cut anybody short when they're kind enough to volunteer their time. Make sure that they're comfortable. This especially relates to my specialty, neurosciences. They may not be able to stand for long periods. Think about the setting, the room, the seating. I used to, when we sort of had, say, 25 learners in a room, I'd set the room in a circle, for example, rather than standing on a podium or a lectern, making sure I checked with them how they felt comfortable. You don't have to do this, but I would always buy them a small gift or give a donation to the related charity too, if someone volunteered their time. Also check out if you can pay their expenses, so travel to and from the employer or the institution. So you could hopefully try and do that beforehand. Check with your corporate or education programme leads to sign off on payment. I think it's the least we can do to offer the travel, and often volunteers wouldn't, often they'd say to me, oh, I know I don't want to take anything, and sometimes they would live near to our hospital trust. So but do think about that as well. So the second way to integrate patient or service user perspectives and share their voice is through narrative, art or audio. So a few examples you might be able to use a narrative from books or journals. So you could take an extract or a quote from a patient or a service user with acknowledgement of the person, the book or the journal. Always provide the full reference. I have an example in the visual below that was published where I described how a patient's poem helped learners focus on person-centred care. And I've always been interested in integrating art, photos, audio. I'm quite creative. So I really enjoyed thinking about how I could integrate patients' voices into my teaching, and I used a poem in this case written by a person who described how Parkinson's disease made them feel, and they described being imprisoned and entombed, and described how nurses had their back to them and were having a laugh with other patients in a bay, and they couldn't see that the nurse couldn't see that they were also laughing. But because of they had a mask-like expression. They described all of this in the poem. You might also want to use audio. So for example, you could use an audio from a podcast. Again, you have to ensure that you acknowledge on any teaching materials, or a radio programme where they talk to patients and service users. So John Barry, for example, hosts the On the Ward mental health podcast, and he talks to residents in St Andrews Healthcare, which is a secure psychiatric hospital, and he discusses individuals' complex mental health needs. And also you could potentially scope patient service user views by linking to patient charities again, and patient server user groups as well. And often when you go on their websites, you will see videos that are all accessible publicly, where there's the charity might have created some patient videos, for example, that you can have a look at whilst you're structuring a module or structuring a teaching session. The third way to integrate patient and service user perspectives is using the current evidence base. You can integrate through research studies and literature reviews into your presentations, making sure you use the correct reference for students, as they'll often ask for it for their assignments. So if a research study is regarding patient care, or a literature review is exploring some aspects of patient or service user experiences. There's also national statistics and demographic data, and this is a great way to engage learners. So you can pose questions maybe at the beginning of a presentation in a quiz form, for example. How many UK patients that were surveyed stated that they felt like this, or they needed help with this. And it's a great way to promote discussion and engage nurses. And I often use that as a technique to start sessions off. I'd scope what the national data was around patient and service user experiences. Quality improvement, service improvement projects related to patient service users. Can you get the person who led that quality improvement project to talk. Often employers have corporate videos you might be able to use too that talk through, because many quality improvement projects influence patient care, and that's a way of integrating patient care service user experiences. Service evaluations often will involve service users and patients. Audit data, so you can look on national data on NHS websites under governance and audits. National Patient Services, again, are very accessible online. I do have a quality improvement and a leadership playlist on my YouTube channel with videos as well on some of those topics that you might find useful. Another great way to increase learners' awareness of patients and service user perspectives is using case scenarios and case studies, anonymised. And you can do this in so many different ways. You could give the case studies out in a classroom setting, allow students time to reflect, read them, and then set some questions so that the learners can feed back as a group later on flip chart paper. Or you can organise pre-reading, self-directed work at home, and then when they come in, you prepare a facilitated group discussion. And the open access paper below, highlighted here, interprofessional education, this was something that I collaborated on with colleagues in our trust, and we were offering interprofessional workshops to medical students, final year nursing students and allied health professionals, and it was really well received. So it was only as a one-off as part of their programme. They were all given an ethical dilemma, a case study to work on, and then together interprofessionally, and questions were set regarding how to support the patient, the relatives, and deal with this ethical issue. And they were small groups of 10 only, and Sanya Thompson, who was our lead consultant for gerontology, and she's a medical educator, and myself facilitated a group, for example, and the case studies were written together, so there was nursing input, medical input, and to meet the needs of our learners. And interestingly, we found the interprofessional learning impacted more positively. If you look at that paper, it evaluates, if you're interested in interprofessional learning, it impacted on the nurses more positively. They had slightly more experience, the student nurses, than the medics actually in practice, that were doing more theory at the time. And it was evident from our evaluation that all the learners increased their insight of other disciplines, because the medics were listening, what does the nurse do, what does the OT do, what would the physio do in this situation? And it really highlighted how important the different disciplines were that stood alone, but also how they all supported each other, and it was really an interesting project to be part of. Yeah, so case studies and scenarios are a great way to discuss patient and patient experiences in education. If you're a nurse educator, I have a nurse education playlist, and I have lots of helpful videos. Here's some example of topics here, with lots more to come, so do check them out. They're all free on my YouTube channel. These are all the full references relating to my talk today, so you can stop the video to get those references. I always get asked for my references. And I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions at all, or any other ideas or experiences, put them in the YouTube comments. If you want to contact me privately, you can DM me on Twitter, my website, check out the videos on my YouTube channel. And if you're interested in buying any of my books, you'll see the details in the YouTube description. And I hope you found it helpful today.